In the sultry haze of 1930s New Orleans, where jazz notes mingled with the scent of magnolias and mystery, Madame Zelina's voodoo shop stood shrouded in twilight. Candles flickered like wary eyes as she gazed into her crystal ball, her voice a whisper of ancient rites. "I see. Betrayal in the shadows. A serpent's kiss." Suddenly, her eyes widened in terror, a vision of her own demise. That night, screams pierced the French Quarter. Zelina lay lifeless, a voodoo doll clutched in her hand, pins piercing its heart. Who had turned prophecy into poison? The city whispered of curses, but one man sought truth. Hercule Poirot. Chapter 1. The arrival in the Crescent City. The steamship SS Lafayette gave a long, mournful blast as she nosed against the wharf at New Orleans, on a morning so thick with river mist that the city seemed to float like a half-remembered dream. It was the spring of 1935, and Hercule Poirot, fastidiously attired in a light grey suit, white spats, and a Panama hat tilted at the precise angle required by both fashion and the sun, stepped down the gangway with the measured dignity of a man who disliked being hurried by either porters or fate. He had come to America at the invitation of a wealthy collector of Egyptian antiquities, who promised a little rest, mon ami, far from the fogs of London. Rest! The word tasted ironic, even as Poirot repeated it to himself. Wherever he travelled, murder travelled with him, as faithfully as his valet George, and the small leather case that contained his tisanes and his hair tonic. A tall man in a rumpled seersucker suit detached himself from the crowd and approached, removing a battered fedora. His face was the colour of well-cured tobacco, and a cigar glowed like a malevolent eye between his teeth. "Monsieur Poirot, Inspector Harlan Roux, homicide. I was told you were arriving today." The accent was pure Louisiana, thick as gumbo. "I'm afraid your vacation just got cancelled." Poirot's eyebrows ascended a perfect millimetre. "Cancelled, Monsieur l'Inspecteur? But I have only this moment arrived. One cannot cancel what has not yet begun." Roux gave a short, humourless laugh. "Tell that to Madame Zelina. She won't be telling any more fortunes. Somebody helped her into the next world last night, and the chief thinks we need the fanciest detective in Europe to figure out how." The little Belgian permitted himself the smallest of sighs. "Very well. Lead on, Inspector. The little grey cells, they are always at the service of justice and of curiosity." They climbed into a black Ford sedan that smelled of chicory coffee and old gun oil. As the car lurched through streets where wrought-iron balconies drooped like tired eyelids, Roux talked. Zelina Thibodeau, everyone called her simply Madame Zelina, had been the most celebrated voodooienne in the city since the great Marie Laveau herself. Descendant, some said, of that legendary queen. Her shop, La Boutique Mystique, stood on the corner of Rue du Maine and Rue Bourbon, its windows painted with serpents and crescent moons. Tourists came for love charms. Society ladies for whispered prophecies. Riverboat gamblers for luck at Faro. And last night, someone had come for murder. "She was found just after midnight," Roux said, swerving around a mule cart. "Door locked from the inside, windows barred, no sign of a struggle. Yet there she sat at her table, dead as Judgment Day, a voodoo doll in her right hand with 7 pins through the heart, and her crystal ball smashed to flinders on the floor. Lips blue, eyes wide open, like she'd seen the devil himself coming for her." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "And the medical examiner?" "Poison, something fast and botanical. We're waiting for the full toxicology, but the doc's betting on datura, or belladonna, Both grow wild out in the bayou, and both figure large in voodoo rites." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "So the city whispers of Gris-Gris and Loa riding the killer, n'est-ce pas?" Rue spat the cigar butt out the window. "Half the town thinks she crossed the wrong spirit. The other half thinks one of her high society clients didn't like what she saw in the cards. Me, I think somebody very human put something very lethal in her chicory." The car pulled up before a narrow shop front painted midnight blue. A small crowd lingered on the banquette, murmuring behind fans and newspapers. Above the door swung a hand-painted sign, "La Boutique Mystique, Madame Zelina Whodunit." A strip of black crepe had already been draped across it. Inside, the air was heavy with incense, patchouli, myrrh, and something sharper, metallic. Candles guttered in red glass holders shaped like human skulls. Shelves groaned beneath bottles of snake oil, bundles of feathers, alligator teeth, and small cloth dolls with button eyes. In the centre of the room stood the table where the tragedy had occurred. Madame Zelina still sat there, because no one had yet moved the body, slumped forward, her turban of royal purple silk askew, revealing iron-grey braids threaded with cowrie shells. Her right hand clutched the doll. Her left rested palm up on the velvet cloth, as though she had been about to turn the final tarot card when death overtook her. The crystal ball lay shattered at her feet, its fragments catching the candlelight like drops of frozen blood. Poirot approached with the reverence of a priest entering a cathedral. He stood motionless for a full minute, absorbing every detail. Then, gently, almost tenderly, he lifted the dead woman's wrist. "Rigor is well established. She has been dead between 10 and 14 hours. The lips, yes, the classic cyanosis of certain alkaloids. And observe, Inspector, the pupils." He tilted her head with care. "Pinpoint, not the dilation one expects with datura. Curious." Rue grunted. "Told you it was poison." "Poison, yes, but which poison? That is the question." Poirot's gaze travelled to the doll. 7 long black pins pierced the cloth heart. 7, the number of completion, of endings. He laid the doll aside and examined the table. A single cup, delicate bone china, incongruous amid the voodoo trappings, stood beside a silver pot still faintly warm. Poirot lifted the lid and inhaled. Chicory and something else. Anise, perhaps? No. Valerian? And beneath it? He dipped a finger, tasted the barest trace. Yes, bitter almond, but not prussic acid, something subtler. On the floor, the shards of the crystal ball glittered. Poirot crouched, his patent leather shoes creaking. With thumb and forefinger, he lifted a fragment no larger than a coin. A faint white powder clung to the inner curve. "Regardez, Inspector, this did not come from the glass itself." Rue squinted. "Cocaine? Arsenic?" "Neither." Poirot slipped the shard into a small envelope. "We shall let the laboratory tell us. But already the little grey cells begin to arrange themselves." He moved about the room with the neat precision of a watchmaker. Nothing escaped him. The half-burned candle of black wax carved with occult symbols. The tarot deck laid out in the Celtic cross, death crossing the Queen of Cups. The faint scuff marks on the floorboards suggesting a second chair had been hastily pushed back. The faint imprint of a man's shoe, narrow, expensive European cut, near the curtained alcove that led to Zelina's private sanctum. At the doorway to that alcove, Poirot paused. A heavy brocade curtain had been torn from 2 of its rings. On the floor lay a single white gardenia, bruised and browning. "Someone left in haste," Poirot murmured. "Or was dragged." Rue followed his gaze. "We figured she locked herself in for protection. maybe had a vision of the killer coming. Or, said Poirot softly, the killer wished you to think exactly that. He stepped into the inner room. Here the atmosphere changed. No tourist trumpery. This was the true sanctum. An altar draped in white satin bore silver candles, a sword, a chalice, and a human skull painted with sigils. On the wall hung a portrait of Marie Laveau herself, eyes following the viewer with disconcerting life. Poirot's attention, however, fixed upon a small mahogany box on the altar. It was locked. From his pocket he produced a slender pick. Every detective, he maintained, must be a competent burglar in the cause of justice. And within seconds, the lid clicked open. Inside lay a single object. A tiny golden serpent, coiled, emerald eyes gleaming. Even in the dim light, it seemed to writhe. The idol of Damballa, Rue breathed. Legend says whoever possesses it can command both fortune and death. Poirot closed the box with care. Legends, Inspector, are like mirrors in a carnival. They distort. Yet sometimes the distortion reveals a truth. He turned back to the shop proper. Outside, thunder rumbled over the river, though the sky had been clear moments before. The candles flickered as though an unseen breath had passed through the room. Poirot stood very still. She was expecting someone, he said at last. Someone she trusted enough to admit after hours. Someone who brought her the chicory she loved, and something more. Someone who knew exactly where she kept the key to that strongbox, yet did not take the serpent. Why? Rue opened his mouth, but Poirot raised a delicate hand. And observe, the doll with 7 pins. It is not a doll of Madame Zelina. Regard the colour of the cloth wrapped around it, scarlet silk. Zelina wore only purple and white, the colours of her loa. No, this doll represents another. The question becomes, who was intended to die, and who died instead? From the street came the sudden wail of a saxophone, mournful and low, as though the city itself mourned. Poirot replaced his hat, adjusted the angle to the millimetre, and turned to Inspector Rue with the faintest of smiles. Lead me, mon ami, to the first of your suspects. Already the pattern begins to emerge, but first— He glanced once more at the serene, terrible face of Madame Zelina. First, we owe the dead the courtesy of the truth. And somewhere in the shadows behind the beaded curtain, something moved. Or perhaps it was only the wind. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Past. The afternoon sun hung over New Orleans like a brazen coin pressed against wet velvet. Heat shimmered off the cobblestones of the Vieux Carré, and the air was thick with the perfume of overblown jasmine, horse dung, and the ever-present tang of the river. Hercule Poirot walked with the brisk, mincing gait that made taller men unconsciously slow their stride. At his side, Inspector Rue sweated through his seersucker, dabbing at his neck with a handkerchief already soaked through. "First stop," Rue announced, "is the lady who found the body. Miss Delphine Moreau, Zelina's godchild and assistant, lives in the little apartment above the shop. She's still shaking like a cypress in a hurricane." They mounted the narrow outside staircase that clung to the side of La Boutique Mystique like a vine. The wooden steps groaned beneath even Poirot's modest weight. At the top, a door painted the identical midnight blue of the shop stood ajar. From within drifted the scent of strong coffee and the low, mournful throb of a Bessie Smith record. Delphine Moreau was perhaps 25, café au lait skin, eyes the colour of chicory, and a turban of scarlet silk that rivaled Zelina's own. She sat at a small table, hands wrapped around a demi-tasse, as though it were the only solid thing left in the world. When she looked up, her gaze held the stunned emptiness Poirot had seen in the eyes of soldiers who had stared too long at the mouth of hell. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, as if speaking louder might wake the dead woman downstairs. "They told me the great detective was coming. I prayed to Legbar you would." Poirot removed his hat and inclined his head with exquisite courtesy. "Mademoiselle, accept the condolences of Hercule Poirot. It is a terrible thing to lose one who was both mother and priestess to you." Delphine's eyes filled instantly. She was more. She was the city's memory. Without Zelina, New Orleans forgets who she truly is. Roux cleared his throat, impatient, but Poirot silenced him with a glance. He drew forward a cane-bottomed chair and sat, folding his gloved hands upon the handle of his cane. "Tell me everything, mademoiselle, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, even what seems trivial. The little grey cells, they feed upon crumbs." Delphine drew a shuddering breath. "Yesterday was the feast of St. John's Eve, the most sacred night of the year for us. Zelina was preparing for the grande ceremony out at Lake Pontchartrain. She was agitated, said the Eloa were restless, that someone had crossed the Veve, the sacred signs, and the balance was broken. She rose and moved to a small altar in the corner. White cloth, 7-day candles, a bowl of water, a silver bell. On it lay a single playing card, the Queen of Spades, face slashed with a knife. This was on the doorstep yesterday morning, Delphine continued. The Queen of Spades means a dark woman brings trouble. Zelina laughed at first. She said only a fool threatens a mambo with playing cards. But then she read the bones. Poirot's eyes sharpened. And what did the bones say? Delphine's voice dropped to a whisper. They spelled betrayal. A serpent in the garden. Someone she had raised up would strike her down. She burned sage all day to cleanse the shop, but the feeling would not leave her. Roux shifted his weight. Did she name names? Delphine shook her head. Zelina never accused without proof, but there were 3 who had reason to hate her lately. She counted on trembling fingers. First, Monsieur Etienne Duval. He has the rival shop on Royal Street. Calls himself Papa Serpent. For years he copied Zelina's rituals, stole her clients. Last month she exposed him publicly at the Maison Blanche tea room. Said his potions were nothing but coloured water, and his visions came from a bottle of absinthe. His business fell off a cliff. Second, Delphine continued, Mademoiselle Clara Beaumont. You know the Beaumonts, old Creole family, money older than the river. Clara came every week for readings. She was terrified Zelina would reveal her secret, that she is carrying a child by a married man. Clara begged her to keep silent. Zelina refused to lie for anyone, even for love. And the third? Poirot prompted softly. Delphine's face darkened. Dr. Lucius Thorne, the professor from Tulane. He wrote that book, Superstition and the Negro Mind, called Zelina, a charlatan milking ignorant women. He came to the shop 2 weeks ago with a photographer, tried to prove her visions were tricks with mirrors and wires. Zelina threw him out bodily. She was strong as a mule when the Eloa rode her. Thorne swore he would destroy her reputation before the year was out. Poirot absorbed this like a sponge. And last night, after the shop closed at 9, Zelina sent me home. Said she had one final client, someone who had telephoned and begged for a private sitting. She would not say who. I offered to stay, but she insisted. Go, child, she told me. Some veils must be lifted alone. I left by the back way. At midnight, I heard screaming, thought it was the St. John's drums from the lake. When I came down, her voice cracked. She was already gone. Poirot rose and moved to the window overlooking the alley. From here one could see the rear entrance to the shop, a heavy door painted with protective sigils in white chalk. This door, was it locked when you found her? Bolted from the inside, windows barred, No other way in or out. Poirot's gaze travelled downward. The alley was narrow, shadowed even at noon. A thin layer of brick dust coated the ground, traditional protection against evil. Yet, in that dust clearly visible, was the print of a woman's high-heeled shoe, the sort worn by fashionable white ladies, not the flat sandals of the quarter's residents. "Curious," he murmured. He turned back to Delphine. "One more thing, mademoiselle. The golden serpent, the idol of Damballa, was it in its box last night?" Delphine's eyes widened. "How did you—" "Yes. Zelina showed it to me only yesterday. Said someone had offered $10,000 for it, an anonymous collector from New York. She was tempted. The shop has struggled since the crash, but she could not sell Damballa. He chose me," she said. "I cannot betray the serpent who guards me." Poirot nodded slowly. $10,000, a fortune in 1935. Enough for murder? He thanked Delphine with a courtly bow and descended the stairs with Rue in tow. Outside, the heat pressed harder. A streetcar clanged past, its bell mournful. Poirot paused on the banquette, eyes half closed against the glare. 3 suspects, he recapitulated. The jealous rival, the desperate heiress, the scornful academic. Classic, no? Yet already something does not fit. The locked room, the untouched idol, the playing cards slashed with spite, and the footprint of a lady who should not walk in alley dust. Rue mopped his brow again. "So where now, maestro?" Poirot's reply was soft but decisive. "Now, mon cher inspecteur, we go to behold the serpent in his den, to the establishment of this papa serpent, Etienne Duval. I wish to observe a charlatan who has been publicly humiliated. Such men nurse grudges, the way a snake nurses venom." They set off down Rue du Maine, past courtyards where fountains whispered and magnolia petals drifted like white moths. Overhead, thunder growled, again though the sky remained brazen. The city held its breath. Behind them, in the empty apartment above La Boutique Mystique, the slashed Queen of Spades fluttered though no window was open, and the candles on Delphine's altar suddenly guttered out, one by one, as though an unseen hand had passed. In the heavy air, the scent of crushed gardenias lingered. Sweet, funereal, and impossible to ignore. Far down the street, a woman in a scarlet dress paused beneath a balcony, glanced back once toward the voodoo shop, then vanished into the crowd as swiftly as smoke. The game, as Hercule Poirot liked to say, was most definitely afoot. Chapter 3. The Shattered Orb and the Serpent's Tongue. The heat had thickened into something almost solid by the time Poirot and Inspector Rue returned to La Boutique Mystique. Uniformed officers kept the curious at bay, but the narrow street still hummed with whispers. "They say her spirit walked last night, heard her bells ringing, though nobody touched them." Inside the shop, the atmosphere pressed heavier than the air outside. The candles had burned low, throwing long shadows that writhed like Loa across the walls. Madame Zelina's body had finally been removed to the morgue, yet the chair where she died seemed to retain her shape, as though the velvet still remembered the weight of prophecy. Poirot stood before the consulting table, hands clasped behind his back, eyes half closed. To Rue, he appeared almost to be listening to music only he could hear. "Observe, Inspector," he said at last, voice soft yet carrying to every corner of the room. "Everything is arranged with the precision of a stage set. The shattered crystal ball at her feet tragedy. The voodoo doll clutched in dramatic desperation fear. The tarot cards frozen in mid-reading mystery. It is all too perfect. One does not poison a woman and then linger to compose a tableau, unless one wishes to say something very specific." He knelt an operation requiring considerable care with his patent leather shoes, and began gathering the fragments of the crystal ball into a clean white handkerchief. Each shard he examined against the light before laying it in precise rows, the way another man might lay out dominoes. Rue watched, chewing an unlit cigar to splinters. "You gonna rebuild the damn thing?" "Rebuild? None, but reconstruct, yes. See here, the fracture pattern radiates from a single point of impact, yet the pedestal is undamaged. The orb did not fall, it was struck deliberately. And observe this residue on the inner surface of fine white powder, not dust, not glass, something added after the breaking." He scraped the powder into a small glass vial with the blade of his pocket knife, labelled it in his neat continental hand, and tucked it away. Next he lifted the voodoo doll. 7 pins of black iron transfixed the heart. The doll itself was fashioned from scarlet silk, an expensive fabric, certainly not the cheap cotton used for tourist gris-gris. "Scarlet," Poirot murmured, "the colour of sacrifice, of passion, of Shango the thunder god." Yet Zelina served Damballa, the white serpent peace, wisdom, creation. This doll was never meant for her own altar. Someone brought it here. Someone wished us to believe Madame feared a rival Mambo. He turned the doll over. Sewn inside the back, almost invisible, was a tiny pocket. From it he drew a single human hair, long, golden, unmistakably European. Rue whistled. "Clara Beaumont is blonde as corn silk." "Précisément. But blonde hair is easily obtained a hairbrush, a careless maid. Let us not leap like grasshoppers." Poirot moved to the teapot. He poured the dregs into a porcelain cup, inhaled, then, to Rue's horror, touched the liquid to his tongue. "Mon Dieu, monsieur, that's evidence!" Evidence that tastes of chicory, valerian, and, yes, a trace of something darker. Not belladonna, after all. The pupils were pinpoint, you recall. That suggests opium or one of its cousins, yet the bitterness is wrong. He swirled the cup thoughtfully. The poison was added after brewing, and in crystalline form see the undissolved grains at the bottom. Our killer stirred poorly. A uniformed sergeant entered, hat in hand. "Inspector, the coroner just telephoned. Preliminary findings, death by massive dose of aconite monkshood. Fast as lightning, stops the heart in minutes, and there's something odd, her tongue was blackened, like she'd licked charcoal." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Aconite, of course. In Haiti they call it the serpent's tongue, for the root resembles a forked tongue, and the burn is fire. Highly prized in certain ceremonies, and the blackened tongue that is the signature of impure distillation. Someone refined it hastily." He crossed to the shelves of dried herbs, fingers dancing over jars labelled in Creole French. "Poudre zombie, racine tremblante, langue de serpent." One jar langue de serpent was nearly empty, its cork stopper lying beside it. "Someone helped themselves last night," Rue growled, "or wished us to believe so." Poirot lifted the jar to the light. At the bottom lay a single fingerprint in the dusty residue, clear, unsmudged, almost ostentatious. He smiled a small cat-like smile that did not reach his eyes. "Now we visit the first of our serpents. But first, Inspector, have your men search the alley again. Look for a woman's kid glove, left hand, I think. White or cream, perfumed with gardenia. And a cigarette butt Turkish, gold-tipped." Our visitor was not content merely to watch from the shadows. As they stepped back into the blinding sunlight, a sudden gust of wind swept down Rue du Maine. The shop door slammed shut behind them, though no hand had touched it. From within came the faint, unmistakable tinkle of spirit bells, 7 clear notes, the same number as the pins in the doll's heart. Roux crossed himself hastily. Poirot merely adjusted his hat. "Come, my friend," he said briskly. "The dead have spoken their piece. Now it is time for the living to confess." Chapter 4. The House of the Golden Serpent. The establishment of Etienne Duval Papa Serpent, as he styled himself, lay 3 blocks deeper into the quarter, on Royal Street, where the antique shops and the absinthe houses rubbed shoulders. A brass plaque, shaped like a coiled cobra, announced Papa Serpent, Lectures d'Avenir and Gris-Gris Authentique. Beneath, in smaller letters, Entrée discrète par l'allée. Poirot raised an eyebrow at the word discrète. A man who advertises discretion usually sells indiscretion at a premium. They entered through the alley gate. The courtyard beyond was a small jungle of banana trees and night-blooming cereus, heavy with the scent of rum and candle smoke. A fountain trickled over a stone serpent whose emerald glass eyes caught the late afternoon light like living gems. Etienne Duval awaited them on a gallery painted the violent green of absinthe. He was tall, copper-skinned, with a shaved head that gleamed like a river stone, and a moustache waxed into perfect crescents. Gold hoops glinted in his ears. A white linen suit hung on him with theatrical elegance. In one hand he held a tall glass of something milky. In the other, a live white pigeon that cooed nervously against his chest. "Messieurs," he greeted in a voice as smooth and dangerous as cane syrup. "You come about, poor Zelina. Tragic. The spirits are angry tonight." He lifted the pigeon. "I was just consulting Legbar for guidance." Poirot's gaze flicked to the bird, then to Duval's eyes, dark, amused, unreadable. "Monsieur Duval," he began without preamble, "you were heard to say, only 3 weeks ago, in the tea-room of Maison Blanche, that Madame Zelina would not live to see another St. John's Eve. You were heard by 20 witnesses." Duval's smile did not waver. "Words spoken in heat, monsieur. Zelina humiliated me publicly. She claimed my visions were false, my potions water. A man has pride." "Pride enough to poison?" Roux growled. Duval released the pigeon. It fluttered to the gallery rail and perched there, head cocked as if listening. "Poison is a woman's weapon, Inspector, or a coward's. I am neither." Poirot strolled to the courtyard, gloved fingers trailing over the leaves. "Yet you keep a garden of monkshood behind that screen, do you not? Aconitum napellus the serpent's tongue. Your jar in the shop was nearly empty. Curious coincidence." Duval's eyes narrowed a fraction. "I keep many plants. Some heal, some teach, some discipline. A mambo must know both sides of the veil." He led them inside. The shop was richer than Zelina's velvet drapes the colour of fresh blood. A massive python coiled in a glass case, its scales shimmering like oil. On a central altar rested a golden serpent idol smaller than Zelina's, but almost identical. Poirot stopped dead. "Interesting replica," he said softly. Duval laughed. "Not replica inspiration. Zelina claimed direct descent from Dambala's line. I claim the same. The lower do not copyright their image, monsieur." Poirot moved closer. The idol's eyes were not emeralds, but yellow diamonds flawed, cheaper. The coils were slightly asymmetrical. A copy, yes, but a good one. 10 days ago, Poirot continued, an anonymous buyer from New York offered Madame Zelina $10,000 for her idol. She refused. Did the same buyer approach you? Duval's composure slipped for the first time. I received no such offer. Yet your business ledger, which Inspector Roux now holds, shows a deposit of $2,000 cash on the very day Zelina refused. Someone paid you to create urgency, perhaps, to frighten her into selling. Duval recovered swiftly. Rich men play games. I do not ask their motives." Rue stepped forward, voice rough. "Where were you last night between 10 and midnight?" "Here, preparing for St. John's Eve. Ask my drummers, they were with me until dawn." Poirot was no longer listening. His attention had fixed on a small table where a single tarot card lay face up, the Queen of Spades, its face slashed exactly as Delphine had described. He lifted it delicately. "You received a warning too, it seems." Duval's bronze mask cracked. "That arrived yesterday. I thought it one of Zelina's tricks to frighten me away from her clients." "Or," Poirot said quietly, "someone wishes us to believe you and Zelina were engaged in a private war, so that when she died by aconite, a poison you openly cultivate, suspicion would fall neatly upon Papa Serpent." Duval's hand moved toward a small silver bell on the altar. Poirot's cane intercepted it with a sharp tap. "Non, monsieur, no messages to accomplices just yet." A sudden gust swept through the courtyard. The banana leaves rattled like bones. The python in its case raised its head and hissed a low, deliberate sound that made Rue's hand drop to his revolver. Duval smiled again, but the smile was thin. "You feel it, don't you, little man? The Loire are watching. They do not like unbelievers in their house." Poirot met the serpent's flat golden stare without flinching. "I believe in order, monsieur. And order tells me that someone entered Zelina's locked shop last night, poisoned her chicory, smashed her crystal ball to hide the aconite crystals, planted a slashed Queen of Spades, and left a doll pinned with 7 iron nails, all to make murder look like vengeance between rival Mambos. Someone who knew both your gardens and your grudges." He turned to leave, then paused. "One last thing. The woman in scarlet who was seen leaving your courtyard at 11:30 last night, wearing gardenia and smoking gold-tipped cigarettes. She is known to you." For the first time, Duval's mask shattered completely. The pigeon on the rail gave a startled coo and took flight into the darkening sky. Poirot inclined his head. "Bonsoir, Papa Serpent. Do not leave the city." As they stepped back into Royal Street, the sun had vanished behind a bank of purple cloud. Thunder rolled over the river like the drums of approaching St. John's Eve. Rue wiped sweat from his brow. "Well, he's guilty as sin." Poirot's reply was almost lost beneath the first fat drops of rain. "Guilty, yes, but of what precisely? That is the beauty of the serpent, mon ami. It can strike with its own fangs, or persuade another snake to strike for it." Behind them, the brass cobra above Duval's door seemed to watch them go, tongue flickering, though it was only painted metal. And somewhere in the quarter, a woman's laugh, low, mocking, familiar, drifted on the storm wind. Chapter 5. The Beaumont Mansion and the Gardenia Ghost. The rain that had threatened all day arrived in sheets just as the black Ford turned onto Esplanade Avenue. Wind whipped the palm fronds into frantic dancers, and the great houses along the avenue seemed to draw their shutters like dowagers, pulling veils across their faces. Number 412, the Beaumont Mansion, stood behind a wall of ancient live oaks, dripping Spanish moss like mourning lace. A coloured butler, in dove-grey livery, admitted them with the resigned air of a man who had opened this door to scandal before. In the entrance hall, a chandelier of Waterford crystal trembled in the storm's breath, scattering fractured rainbows across marble floors. "Miss Clara will receive you in the orchid house," he murmured. "She finds the drawing-room oppressive today." They followed him through corridors lined with ancestors whose painted eyes followed Poirot with chilly disapproval. At the rear of the house, double doors opened onto a glass cathedral of a conservatory. The air inside was thick, tropical, almost liquid. Orchids in violent purples and corpse whites hung from baskets. Tree ferns dripped. A small fountain played over black volcanic stones. In the centre, beneath a vine heavy with scarlet blossoms, sat Clara Beaumont. She was perhaps 28, pale as the moon, in a black afternoon dress that made her look half in mourning already. Golden hair was swept into a chignon, from which loose strands escaped like guilty secrets. Her gloved hands cream-kid, left glove missing its middle button, twisted a lace handkerchief into knots. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, rising with the fluid grace of old money. "They told me Scotland Yard walked on water. I see now the rumours were understated." Poirot bowed with perfect correctness. "Mademoiselle, Hercule Poirot is Belgian, not English, and he walks only on the solid ground of truth, though today, I confess, the ground is rather wet." Clara gave a small, brittle laugh and gestured to wicker chairs. A maid appeared silently with a silver tray. Café au lait, petit four, and Poirot noted at once a single white gardenia floating in a crystal bowl. "You will take coffee?" Clara asked. Her voice was magnolia sweet, but her eyes were bruised violet with sleeplessness. Poirot accepted the cup, inhaled its steam, and set it down untasted. "Mademoiselle, you were Madame Zelina's client for nearly 2 years. You visited her privately last week, and again according to her appointment book the night before she died. Yet you told Inspector Roux you had not seen her in a month." Clara's cup rattled in its saucer. "I may have been confused about dates." "Confusion is a luxury we cannot afford when a woman lies dead." Poirot's tone remained courteous, almost gentle. "Zelina threatened to reveal that you are with child. The father is married. A scandal would ruin the Beaumont name. Did you go to her last night to beg her silence one final time?" Clara's hand flew to her throat. "I went, yes, at 9 o'clock. She was alive when I left, alive and angry. She said the lower had shown her everything, my lover, the child, the lies. She would not be bought. I fled in tears. Ask the cab driver. He took me to the Absinthe House on Bourbon. I drank 2 Sazeracs and sat there until closing. Dozens saw me." Roux grunted. "We're checking the driver." Poirot was studying the gardenia in the bowl. Its petals were bruised, exactly like the one found in Zelina's sanctum. "You wear gardenia, mademoiselle." "It is the Beaumont flower. My grandmother brought the first plant from Cuba." "And you smoke Turkish cigarettes with gold tips?" Clara hesitated a fraction too long. "Occasionally." Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small evidence envelope. Inside lay the crushed cigarette butt found in Duval's courtyard, and a single cream-kid glove. Left hand, perfume still clinging. "These were recovered this morning. The glove is from the Maison Blanche, size 6, sold only last month. The monogram inside CB is embroidered in gold thread. Shall we compare it to your wardrobe?" Clara went white beneath her rice powder. "Someone is trying to destroy me." "Or," Poirot said softly, "someone very clever is weaving a web in which you, Mademoiselle Beaumont, are intended to hang like a jewelled spider." He rose and moved among the orchids, pausing before a specimen whose throat was spotted crimson. "Tell me about Dr. Lucius Thorne." Clara's breath caught. "Lucius! He is a friend of the family. He lectures at Tulane. He despises voodoo. Yet he was seen leaving your house at dawn 3 weeks ago, by the gardener, who is not blind." Clara's composure shattered. "Yes, Lucius is the father. He said he would leave his wife, But when Zelina found out, he panicked. He swore he would silence her himself if necessary. Rue leaned forward, like a bloodhound scenting quarry. "You're saying Thorn poisoned Zelina?" "I don't know. He came here yesterday afternoon terribly agitated. Said Zelina had sent him a letter threatening exposure unless he paid her $5,000. He asked to borrow the money from me. I refused." Poirot's eyes gleamed. Blackmail, a motive richer than jealousy. He lifted the gardenia from its bowl. Beneath it lay a small key, tarnished brass, shaped like a serpent. "This key," he said quietly, "opens the back gate of La Boutique Mystique. Zelina gave it to you long ago, for midnight consultations when scandal must be avoided. You still had it last night." Clara stared at the key as though it were a living viper. Outside, thunder crashed directly overhead. The glass roof of the orchid house shook, rain hammered like bullets. For an instant every orchid seemed to turn its throat toward them, crimson spots glowing like fresh blood. Poirot slipped the key into his pocket. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have been most illuminating." As they stepped back into the storm, Rue had to shout over the wind, "We've got her, Poirot! The glove, the key, the motive!" Poirot's reply was almost lost beneath the roar of the tempest. "Non, mon ami. We have the perfect fly for the web, but the spider is still hidden." And somewhere in the rain-lashed garden, a single white gardenia petal drifted from an upper balcony and was swept away into the darkness, fragrant and accusing. Chapter 6. The Professor's Laboratory. Tulane University crouched on the edge of the city like a red brick fortress against the night. By the time the Ford splashed through flooded streets and deposited Poirot and Rue at the gates, the storm had settled into a steady, relentless drumming. Gas lamps hissed in the downpour. Lightning flickered over the live oaks, turning their leaves the colour of old bones. Dr. Lucius Thorne's office lay in the anthropology building, a narrow Gothic tower that smelled of camphor, dust, and the particular arrogance of men who believe they have outgrown fear. A brass plate read, "Dr. L. Thorne, Comparative Religion and Folk Superstition." The door was ajar. Inside, a single green banker's lamp threw a pool of light across chaos. Stacks of journals, plaster casts of African masks, a human skull grinning from a shelf, and most arresting a large glass tank in which a live diamondback rattlesnake coiled and uncoiled with hypnotic patience. Thorne himself stood at a workbench, back turned, pipetting clear liquid into a row of test tubes. He was tall, ascetic, 40 perhaps, with the pale indoor skin of a scholar and a neatly trimmed beard going iron grey at the edges. A white laboratory coat hung open over an immaculate three-piece suit. He did not turn when they entered. "I wondered how long it would take the police to arrive," he said in clipped academic tones. "Close the door, Inspector. The specimen dislikes drafts." Only then did he face them. His eyes were the cold blue of glacier ice. "Dr. Thorne," Poirot began, removing his hat and shaking rain from it with fastidious care, "you are a man of science. Yet science, like confession, is best when complete. Let us speak plainly. You despised Madame Zelina. You threatened her publicly. You were seen near her shop on the night she died. And now we learn you attempted to borrow $5,000 yesterday, the exact sum she demanded to keep silent about your affair with Clara Beaumont." Thorne set the pipette down with deliberate calm. "Despised is a strong word, monsieur. I regarded her as a parasite feeding on human credulity. My book was a scholarly exposé, nothing more. As for the rest, yes, I fathered Clara's child. A moment of weakness. Zelina discovered it and attempted blackmail. I refused to pay. Rue stepped forward. So you killed her instead. Thorne's smile was thin. With what? Harsh language? Poirot's gaze drifted to the workbench. Among the glassware lay a small brown bottle, labelled Aconitum napellus, purified alkaloid. The level was markedly low. With monkshood, perhaps, Poirot said softly. The serpent's tongue. You cultivate it in the university greenhouse, I believe, and your laboratory notebook, which Inspector Rue now confiscates, records an extraction performed 2 nights ago. Enough, the coroner tells me, to kill 20 women. Thorne did not flinch. I extract many poisons for research. Aconite features in half the voodoo pharmacopoeia I am cataloguing. Possession is not murder. Poirot moved closer to the snake tank. The rattler raised its head, tongue flickering. You are familiar with the locked room, Doctor? Zelina was poisoned inside a shop bolted from within. No struggle. She trusted her killer enough to drink chicory poured by his hand. A man she knew, perhaps a man who had convinced her he wished to make amends. Thorne's composure flickered. The tiniest fracture. I was here all evening. My assistant, Mr. Landry, worked with me until 1 o'clock cataloguing artifacts. Ask him. We have, Rue growled. He says you left at 10:30 for a breath of air, and returned at 12:15 looking, and I quote, like death warmed over. Thorne shrugged. I walked in the rain. I often do when solving a problem. Poirot lifted a small object from the desk, a woman's cream kid glove, left hand faintly perfumed with gardenia. This was found wrapped around the handle of Zelina's back door this morning. The rain did not wash away the scent. You borrowed it from Clara to protect your hand from the brass knob, which you knew was painted with protective brick dust that stains. A fastidious man would not risk red marks on his skin. Thorne stared at the glove, as though it were a living scorpion. Someone is framing me with theatrical thoroughness, he said at last. First, the slashed Queen of Spades sent to both Duval and myself. Then the hair in the doll. Now this glove. It is almost admirable. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Admirable? Yes. The work of a mind that understands both symbolism and misdirection. Tell me, Doctor the Golden Serpent Idol. You wrote in your last paper that it is a 19th century fake, yet you offered $10,000 for it through an intermediary in New York. Why? For the first time, Thorne looked genuinely startled. How could you possibly— Because the intermediary, a certain Mr. Goldstein of 42nd Street, is an old acquaintance of Hercule Poirot. He telephoned me this morning. You wished to acquire the idol before your rivals at Harvard could. Professional jealousy, Doctor, or something more profitable. Rumour says the idol contains a hollow compartment, perhaps filled with diamonds from an old smuggling run. Thorne recovered swiftly. Idle gossip. Yet Zelina refused to sell. And now she is dead, and the idol remains in its box untouched. Curious, none? Lightning flashed, illuminating the snake's tank in stark white. The rattler struck the glass with a sudden explosive buzz that made Rue jump and swear. Thorne smiled faintly. Even science keeps its serpents, gentlemen. Poirot turned to leave, then paused. One final thing. The aconite that killed Zelina was impure, blackened the tongue. Your notebook records a hurried distillation. A careful scientist does not hurry unless he is interrupted, or unless he wishes the impurity to be noticed, so that suspicion falls on someone less meticulous. He tipped his hat. We shall meet again, Dr. Thorne, very soon. As they descended the tower stairs, the storm seemed to ease, as though the city itself exhaled. Rue was jubilant. He's our man, Poirot. Motive means opportunity, everything." Poirot's reply was almost inaudible over the dripping eaves. "Everything except the one thing that matters, mon ami. Why did the killer leave the idol behind when $10,000 and perhaps a fortune in diamonds lay within reach? That is the question that coils at the heart of this affair, like the serpent that swallows its own tail." Behind them, in the darkened laboratory, the rattlesnake settled back into its endless patient coils. And the green lamp burned steadily on, casting the shadow of a hanged man across the skull on the shelf. Chapter 7. The Queen of Spades. Gambles. The storm broke at dawn, leaving New Orleans washed clean and strangely quiet, as though the city itself were holding its breath. By 9 o'clock the sky was the colour of a fresh bruise, and the air carried the scent of wet brick, chicory, and something darker, funeral jasmine left too long in water. Hercule Poirot had not slept. He sat in the small private parlour of the Hotel Monteleone, a single green-shaded lamp burning, papers and photographs spread before him like tarot cards in a reading he alone understood. On the table, the shards of the crystal ball arranged into their original sphere, held together now by strips of transparent tape, the scarlet voodoo doll, the cream kid glove, the brass serpent key, the 3-slashed queens of spades, one from Delphine's altar, one from Duval's, one from Thorne's wastebasket, and a single white gardenia beginning to brown at the edges. He stared at them until the pattern emerged, sharp as a stiletto between the ribs. At 10 o'clock precisely, Inspector Roux burst in, dripping rain from his hat brim. "We've got a new witness, Poirot. Old woman sells pralines on Dauphine. Swears she saw Clara Beaumont veiled, but unmistakable leave Zelina's back door at 11:40 last night. And the lab just confirmed. The aconite came from Thorne's private batch. Impurity matches exactly." Poirot did not look up. And the fingerprints on the jar in Zelina's shop? Smudged. Useless. "Of course they are smudged," Poirot murmured, "because the jar was wiped clean before the single perfect print was added. A print that belongs, I suspect, to none of our 3 serpents." Roux stared. "You're saying someone else entirely." "I am saying, mon cher, that we have been invited to a magnificent illusion. 3 perfect suspects, jealous rival, desperate heiress, scorned academic, each with motive, each with traces of guilt scattered like rose petals at a wedding. Yet none of them took the one thing that mattered, the golden serpent, $10,000 left behind. That is the flaw in the mirror." He rose and began pacing, hands clasped behind his back. "Consider the locked room, bolted from within, the poison in the chicory, the shattered orb concealing crystals, the doll with Clara's hair, the gardenia, the Queen of Spades sent to terrify 2 rivals. All of it screams voodoo vengeance, except nothing was stolen, and Zelina died facing her killer across a table, drinking from a cup he poured. She trusted him enough to turn her back while he stirred death into her coffee." Roux scratched his head. "So who the hell was it?" Poirot stopped before the window. Below, a funeral jazz band marched past. Brass mourning turned strangely festive. "Someone who knew every secret of all 3 suspects. Someone who could move between the worlds of the Quarter and the Garden District without remark. Someone who had access to Thorne's laboratory, Duval's garden, Clara's gloves. Someone Zelina herself raised like a daughter." Roux's jaw dropped. "Delphine!" "Delphine Moreau," Poirot said softly. "Godchild, assistant, heir to the shop, and if Zelina died, interstate to the idol. Delphine who found the body, who wept so convincingly, who told us exactly which 3 people hated Zelina most. Delphine who knew the backdoor key was kept under the gardenia bowl. Delphine, whose fingerprints would raise no suspicion on any jar in that shop. He turned, eyes glittering. Think, Inspector. The crime required 4 acts. Poison Zelina with aconite stolen from Thorn, leaving his notebook open to the page. Plant Clara's hair and glove to implicate the heiress. Slash Queens of Spades and deliver them to Duval and Thorn, creating 2 more perfect suspects. Stage the voodoo tableau doll, shattered ball, pins so that we would chase spirits instead of motive. Only one person could perform all 4 without ever leaving the building for long. Delphine sent Zelina's regular clients away that night, claiming her godmother was with the Loa. She brewed the chicory herself, added the crystals, waited for death, then smashed the ball to hide the residue. She locked the door from inside, climbed the outside stairs wearing Clara's borrowed veil and glove for the praline woman to see, and discovered the body at midnight. Rue whistled low. But the idol! Why not take it? Because greed was never the motive. Revenge was. Zelina had decided to sell the serpent to the New York collector, after all $10,000 to open a proper temple in Haiti, away from American skeptics. Delphine overheard the telephone call. To her, that was the ultimate betrayal, abandoning the city, the shop, the godchild who had served since childhood. So, Zelina had to die before the sale, and the idol must remain unsold, untouchable, sacred forever. He picked up the scarlet doll and turned it over. In the seam, almost invisible, was a tiny embroidered DM. Delphine made this doll years ago for protection. She kept it. Last night she dressed it in scraps of Clara's discarded silk and pinned Clara's stolen hair to the head. A perfect frame. Rue reached for the telephone. I'll have her picked up. No. Poirot's voice cut like a blade. We do not arrest yet. We set the final trap. Tonight is the full moon after St. John's Eve, the night the veil is thinnest. Delphine plans a ceremony to lay Zelina's spirit to rest. She has invited Duval, Clara, Thorn, all 3 terrified of exposure or curse. We will attend also. And there, before the altar of Damballa, the Queen of Spades will play her last card. He lifted the 3 slashed queens and laid them together. When overlapped, the knife cuts formed a perfect serpent devouring its tail. Order and method, Inspector. The serpent swallows itself and reveals the hand that held the knife. Outside, the funeral band had reached the corner. The trumpet cried a high, mourning note that lingered in the wet air like a warning. Poirot placed the Browning gardenia atop the evidence and smiled small, neat, and utterly deadly. Tonight, he said, the little grey cells will have their justice, and the lower, perhaps, will have theirs as well. Chapter 8. The Temple of the White Serpent. The moon hung over New Orleans like a silver coin, hammered flat and thin, so bright it bleached the colour from the streets. Midnight on the day after St. John's Eve, and the city still throbbed with distant drums. La Boutique Mystique had become a temple tonight. Windows shuttered, door draped in white satin, the air inside thick with copal smoke and the low, ceaseless chant of 20 veiled women swaying in a circle. At the heart of the room stood the great altar of Damballa. White cloth, 7 white candles, a silver bowl of milk, and the golden serpent coiled in eternal watchfulness. Madame Zelina's body lay in state before it on a low catafalque, hands folded, face serene under a veil of finest lace. Death had returned her beauty. She looked 30 again. Delphine Moreau, robed in white, head wrapped in a turban of silver lamé, moved like a bride among the mourners. In her hands she carried a silver aspergillum dipped in Florida water and rum. Her voice rose above the drums, clear and heartbreaking. "Tonight we call Zelina home. Tonight the lower open the gate. Whoever sent her across before her time, let the serpent see, let the serpent strike." She had invited the 3 suspects, and all 3 had come. Fear stronger than pride. Etienne Duval stood near the door, white suit ghostly in the candlelight, eyes flicking to every shadow. Clara Beaumont, veiled in black lace, knelt on a prie-dieu, rosary beads clicking through trembling fingers. Dr. Lucius Thorne, lingered by the crystal ball shards, now swept into a silver bowl as offering, face pale, lips pressed bloodless. Inspector Roux and 2 plainclothes men waited in the alley. Poirot, small and impeccable in evening dress, stood half-hidden behind a draped statue of Legba, silent as a black cat. The drums quickened. Delphine lifted the golden serpent above her head. "Damballa, ancient one, look upon your children, see the betrayer, let the poisoner drink his own venom." She began the invocation in liquid Creole, words curling like smoke. The women swayed faster. One by one they fell into trance, heads rolling, eyes white. A low moan rose. Poirot watched Delphine's face. Grief, yes, but beneath it something harder, triumph. She set the idol down and took up the scarlet voodoo doll, the same one from the crime scene, now dressed in fresh silk. 7 new pins glinted in her hand. "These pins carry the names of the guilty," she cried. "One for the liar, one for the thief, one for the lover who betrayed, one for the scholar who mocked the lower." She drove the first pin home. Clara Beaumont gasped and clutched her heart. The second pin. Duval flinched as though struck. The third. Thorne took one involuntary step backward. The 4th, 5th, 6th, each accompanied by a name hissed low enough that only the front row heard. At the 7th pin Delphine paused, eyes shining with tears or madness. "And the 7th," she whispered, "for the child who was never loved enough." She raised the doll high then, with sudden savage force, plunged the 7th pin straight through the serpent-embroidered heart. Every candle in the room flared blue and died. Darkness absolute. A woman screamed. Glass shattered. Someone shouted in French. Then a single match flared Poirot's match, lighting first his calm face, then the scene of chaos. The golden serpent idol was gone from the altar. Delphine stood frozen, empty-handed, staring at the bare white cloth as though the world had cracked open. Poirot's voice cut through the darkness like a scalpel. "Messieurs, dames, remain perfectly still. The serpent has not been stolen. It has merely returned to its true keeper." He struck another match and advanced to the catafalque. With gentle reverence, he lifted Zelina's veil, and from her coldly folded hands drew forth the golden idol, warm from her skin. Gasps rippled outward. "Impossible!" Thorne rasped. "Non, docteur. Perfectly logical." Poirot turned to the assembly. Mademoiselle Delphine planned everything beautifully, except one detail. Madame Zelina was not dead when Delphine left her at 11:40. She was dying, yes, but conscious enough to understand betrayal. With her last strength, she took back the idol she had intended to sell, pressed it to her breast and died clutching the only thing she truly loved more than the child who murdered her. He held the idol high. In the matchlight, its emerald eyes blazed. Delphine returned at midnight, discovered the body, and in the confusion slipped the idol beneath the shroud before screaming for help. She needed it hidden until after the funeral, when she could claim it as heir. Tonight's ceremony was meant to be her coronation. Delphine's face twisted. "Lies! The lower took it. The lower." Poirot said gently, "are remarkably respectful of locked doors and dying women's fingers. You poisoned your godmother because she chose Damballa over you. You framed 3 innocents because you needed the city to look away from the one person who had access, motive, and grief sharp enough to cut bone," he signalled. Roux and his men stepped from the shadows. Delphine's eyes darted like a trapped animal's. For a moment, it seemed she might bolt. Then her shoulders sagged, and the silver turban slipped, revealing iron-grey braids, Selina's braids, cut and woven in secret mourning. "I only wanted her to stay," she whispered. "She was going to leave me for Haiti, after everything I gave her." She sank to her knees before the altar. "Damballa, forgive your daughter." The drums had fallen silent. In the hush, the only sound was Clara Beaumont quietly weeping not for Selina, but for the child she would now bear alone. Poirot replaced the idol in Selina's hands and drew the veil back over her face. "Justice," he said quietly, "is sometimes colder than any lower." Outside, the moon slid behind a cloud, and the quarter exhaled one long, weary breath of magnolia and river mist. The serpent had spoken. The circle was closed. Chapter 9. The confession beneath the veiled dawn crept over the Mississippi like a guilty lover, pale and reluctant. In the back room of Central Lockup, a single bulb burned above a scarred table. Delphine Moreau sat beneath it in a plain grey prison dress, silver, turban gone, braids unbound, looking suddenly very young and very old at the same time. Across from her sat Hercule Poirot, immaculate despite the hour, gloves spotless, moustache waxed to needle points. Inspector Roux leaned against the wall, arms folded, cigar unlit for once. A police stenographer waited in the corner, pencil poised. Delphine stared at her hands, at the faint white scars across the knuckles, old burns from candle wax and rum offerings. "Ask what you want," she said at last, voice hoarse from chanting and weeping. "The lower already know everything." Poirot spoke gently, almost kindly. "Begin with the day Madame Selina decided to sell the serpent." Delphine's shoulders lifted in a sigh that seemed to come from the marrow. 3 weeks ago, a man telephoned from New York, rich voice, Yankee accent, offered $10,000 American dollars for Damballa. Selina laughed at first. Then the bills came rent 3 months late, roof leaking, tourists thinning after the crash. She told me that night after closing, "Ma petite, I am tired. Haiti calls me home. With this money, I build a proper fort on the mountain, far from these skeptics and their cameras." She was packing already in her mind. I saw the tickets in her drawer, Port-au-Prince, one way, one passenger. She looked up, eyes shining with unshed tears. I begged her. On my knees I begged. "Take me with you, Moraine. I am your daughter in the religion." She touched my cheek just once and said, "Child, Damballa needs a guardian here. New Orleans is still sick with slavery's poison. Someone must stay and heal her." Then she smiled the way she smiled when the lower rowed her distant, already halfway across the water. Delphine's fingers twisted together until the knuckles blanched. I understood then she had never been mine, only borrowed. That night I walked the quarter until sunrise. I passed Duval's shop, saw his fake serpent gleaming, and hated him for copying what he could never feel. I passed the Beaumont mansion, saw Clara's light burning, and hated her for buying prophecies with Daddy's money while I gave blood and years. I passed Tulane, saw Thorne's tower, and hated him for calling us frauds, when he had never felt the cold when Papa Legba opens the gate. She laughed, a small cracked sound. "Hate is a patient serpent. It waits." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And the aconite?" "Thorn kept a vial in his desk drawer, careless man. I cleaned his office twice a week for extra money. Students pay better than readings. I took only a little, distilled it again in Zelina's back room, so the tongue would blacken voodoo signature. Everyone would blame the religion, not the daughter." She described the night with the calm of a priestess recounting ritual. "She let me in at 10:30, thought I brought her special tea for the headache. I brewed chicory the way she liked strong, with valerian. While her back was turned, I added the crystals. They dissolved slow. She drank, smiled, said, 'You are my good child, Delphine.' Then her eyes fixed like she saw straight to the crossroads. She whispered one word, 'Serpent.' I thought she meant the lower judged me. Only later I understood she knew." Delphine's voice dropped to a thread. She tried to stand. The cup fell. She clutched the idol from the altar, pressed it to her heart like a crucifix. I could have taken it then, $10,000 in my hand. But her eyes, Moraine's eyes, were on me, and I ran, up the outside stairs, waited in my room until the poison finished its work. Then I came down screaming." Poirot spoke softly. "And the elaborate framing of the others?" "Smoke," Delphine said simply. "Thorn's notebook left open. Clara's glove and hair easy to steal when she came crying the week before. Duval's monk's hood jar, I took a handful of leaves weeks earlier. The slashed queens, I sent them myself. Midnight mail, no prints. The scarlet doll, I sewed it years ago for protection. Last night, I dressed it in Clara's cast-off silk. Every thread pointed away from the one person no one would suspect the grieving godchild." She looked at Poirot then, really looked, as though seeing him for the first time. "You knew because of the idol?" "Précisément. A thief would have taken it. A rival would have destroyed it. Only love twisted into hatred would leave it with the woman who chose it over a living daughter." Silence stretched, thick as the river fog outside. Delphine leaned forward until her forehead almost touched the table. "Tell them to bury her with the serpent. Promise me that, little man with the moustaches. Promise on your Catholic saints. Or your Belgian honour, whatever you hold sacred. Let Damballa guard her in death, since I could not in life." Poirot regarded her for a long moment. "You have my word, mademoiselle." She nodded once, exhausted. "Then I am ready." Rue stepped forward with handcuffs, but Poirot raised a hand. "Un moment." He reached into his pocket and drew out the small white gardenia, now completely brown, edges curled like old paper. He laid it on the table between them. "From Zelina's altar," he said quietly. "She kept one always for you, her Delphine flower, even at the end." Delphine stared at the dead bloom. A single tear, the first genuine one, rolled down her cheek and splashed beside it. Outside, a church bell tolled 6. Somewhere a steamboat whistled low and mournful, heading down river toward the sea. In the bare room, the serpent's circle was finally, irrevocably broken. Chapter 10. The serpent returns to the river. 3 days later, on a morning so clear the Mississippi looked polished, Hercule Poirot stood on the levee at the foot of Canal Street and watched a small, dignified procession wind its way down from the quarter. The jazz funeral of Madame Zelina Thibodeau moved with the slow majesty that only New Orleans can give, to grief. A brass band in black suits with white gloves led the way, playing "Just a Closer Walk with Thee" in a minor key that made the very air ache. Behind them walked 20 women in white, heads wrapped in gleaming tignons, faces hidden behind lace veils. Then came the open wagon drawn by 2 black horses with white plumes. On it rested the coffin-simple cypress wood painted white, draped in a satin quilt embroidered with the serpent and the rainbow of Damballa. At the coffin's head walked Delphine Moreau. She wore no chains. Poirot had quietly asked that she be allowed this last honour. 2 silent detectives followed at a respectful distance. Her face was bare of paint or tears. She looked carved from ebony and sorrow. In her arms she carried the golden serpent, wrapped in white silk. The procession halted at the water's edge. A small flatboat waited, decked in white roses and gardenias. The band ceased. The only sound was the lapping of the river and the distant cry of gulls. A very old woman, some said she was Marie Laveau's last living godchild, stepped forward with a silver bowl of rum and milk. She poured a libation into the current, chanting in Creole, so ancient it seemed to rise from the mud itself. Poirot stood a little apart, hat in hand, the sun warm on his neck. Inspector Roux joined him, hat also removed. Eyes unusually soft. "You kept your promise," Roux murmured. "Always," Poirot replied. "A gentleman's word is the one thing even murder cannot poison." Delphine laid the wrapped idol on the coffin lid. She unwrapped the silk, revealing the serpent in full glory, emeralds catching the sun like living fire. For a long moment she simply looked at it, then at the woman inside the coffin who had worn it closer than any lover. She spoke, voice carrying clear over the water. "Moraine, I return what was never mine to keep. Take Dambala with you across the water. Guard the gate for me until I come. And if the lower judge me harshly, tell them I loved you too much for this world." She pressed her lips to the cool gold, then stepped back. The old woman sprinkled rum over the coffin, over the serpent, over Delphine's bowed head. The band struck up, when the saints go marching in, slow at first, then faster, joyous, defiant. 6 pallbearers lifted the coffin into the flatboat. A young boy cast off the rope. The current caught the little vessel at once. It moved out into the broad channel, white against brown water, roses scattering like blessings. The sun climbed higher. The serpent flashed once, blindingly, then the boat rounded the bend toward Algiers and was gone. Only then did Delphine weep. Roux cleared his throat. "Trials set for October. State'll ask for the rope, but with no prior record and the circumstances. Maybe life." Poirot watched the empty place where the boat had been. "Life is what she asked for Zelina and was refused. Perhaps the court will be kinder." They turned back, toward the city. Behind them the band played on, the music growing fainter until it blended with the river's endless song. That afternoon Poirot took coffee in the Court of Two Sisters with Clara Beaumont. She wore mourning black, relieved only by a single white gardenia at her throat. Her hand rested, unconscious and protective, on the slight curve beneath her dress. "I am leaving for France next month," she said quietly. "The child will be born in Paris. Lucius has filed papers. It seems even skeptics can be tamed by scandal." Poirot inclined his head. "And you are content?" A faint smile. "Content is a large word, but I am resolved. Thank you, monsieur, for giving my child a mother who is merely ruined, not hanged." Evening found Poirot on the deck of the SS Corinthia, bound for New York and thence to England. The skyline of New Orleans receded towers, spires, the slow turn of the river. He stood at the rail, a small valise at his feet, the inevitable green tisane steaming in a cup. A steward approached with a package wrapped in white tissue. "Left for you at the gangway, sir. No card." Poirot unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a small silver bell, the kind rung to open ceremonies, and a single white gardenia, still fresh, as though it had been cut only moments before. He lifted the flower to his nose. Beneath the sweetness lingered the faintest trace of rum and river water. Poirot smiled, small, sad, and utterly comprehending. "Adieu, Madame Zelina," he murmured to the darkening water. "Adieu, Delphine. May the serpent guard you both." He rang the little bell once. The pure note drifted out over the wake, carried southward on the warm night wind until it was lost among the cypress and the stars. Far behind, in a city that never quite sleeps, a new sign went up above a familiar midnight blue door. La Nouvelle, Boutique Mystique. Ouvert sous la protection de Dame Bala et de la mémoire de Madame Zelina. Toutes les âmes bienvenues. And on certain nights, when the moon is full and the drums rise from the lake, passer-by swear they hear the faint answering tinkle of a silver bell from somewhere deep inside. The serpent, after all, is eternal. Finn.